Hi YouTubers, Gil. Today, this is 2019 March 25th, and in this video I'm gonna talk a little bit about comparing 80s to today. Like, I'm just gonna spread out my story. I'm gonna spread out what was in my mind as a teenager during the 80s decade, or what was typically the things that we think about, or what was our minds made of during the 80s decade. Well, I'll point it all out basing on everything that I remember what I did during that time. Well, basically, so like going back to say 1980, what was in my mind, or how things looked for me during, say, like, I'm gonna start out with 1980. If I remember, I was 10 years old. 1980, what was our minds made of during the 80s decade versus today's decade? So in 1980, I was 10 years old. At the time, what was in my mind was toys. I loved toys. Back in my day, I had this super garage toy. I mean, it was like for the Hot Wheels cars. And then it was like all about toys at the time. I was exiting my childhood life during 1980, but what was in a kid's life, what was in a kid's mind during the 80s decade is basically that, toys. I mean, it was all about toys and things that I loved to do. When I came home from school, I mean, I would just go straight to the TV. I remember that. I mean, I would go straight to the TV, turn on the TV for the cartoons, watch my cartoons, Tom and Jerry and Bugs Bunny, and I used to watch all that stuff. And then, like, also what was in my mind is my friends, friends coming over so he could play. My brother Arnold and me and Arnold would just be at the TV watching our cartoons, and then what was in my mind, the kids, we would just wait for the kids to knock at our door, or we would just go to their house and knock at their door, or sometimes we would just go to their house and knock at the door, and they'd let us in, and we'd play with their toys. Remember that? We used to play with their toys. A lot of toys. We did toys. A lot of toys. Legos. I used to do Legos. And I was actually kind of jealous of my neighbor who had a lot of cool ass toys, back in my day, Shit. Yeah, he had a lot of cool Legos and stuff, Shit. I would get kind of jealous of that, Or sometimes, if we were not in our rooms playing with toys, that's what we typically did as kids during the 80s decade. This was 1980, Anyway, when I was 10 years old. We would visit friends playing with their toys, or sometimes we'd just go play games in the backyard, or we would ride bikes, our little bikes, and we would play cops and robbers. We used to do that kind of stuff, during that time, toys, that was all in my mind. So if you notice that you don't hear me talking about iPads or internet, iPhones or Samsungs, or like the earbuds, or if you notice, I'm not even talking about that because we didn't have those then, So all that was in my mind was toys, toys and TV, watching cartoons on the TV at 2 o'clock when you would come home and then as soon as the cartoons was over, that's it. We had to go find something else because they weren't showing any more cartoons after 3 o'clock or something after coming home from school. So we would just play with their toys or play with friends, So going on to 1981, I was 11 years old in 1981. Well, I was living in Mexico at the time, but when we came back, it was still the same, but it went up to a little upgrade though, sort of like We we got our first Atari. Kicking the cup away. Well, anyway, in 1981, now the Atari was now in our minds, Hector's mind. Hector, we got the Atari. So going on to the end of 81. But like in 1981, something new came into my mind, and that was these tape recorders. It was the first time for me to own a cassette. Yes, a cassette tape. And it was the first time for me to come across those. And then I was astonished about being able to record voices. I thought that was really cool. I thought that was so freaking cool, man. So I mean, from that time on, that's where recording has began. So 1981. So now going through 1981, recorders or tape recorders was now in my mind. It was in our mind, Hector's mind. Hector got his first tape recorder or radio cassette recorder for his birthday. So now music became our new thing in our minds, like radio, like the latest of the music, like Blondie and Whip It, that song Whip It, and Coward of the County, and like The Tide is High, that kind of stuff. I mean, all the latest hits in the Mighty 690. Like Hector was really into that stuff because he had neighbors that was really into the music. Because they had their boom boxes, their radio cassette recorders, and so Hector wanted to go with the trend with the radio, with owning one of those too. And so he asked for a radio cassette recorder for his birthday. So he got one, and he felt pretty happy because he was going with the trend with a radio cassette recorder, So, and I thought that was really cool. So that was now something new in our minds, the radio cassette recorder and cassettes and recording off the radio. That was big right there. That was big. That was like the big thing back then. I tell you, that was occupying my mind at the time, and that's all that was in my mind, and Hector's mind, radio and recording off the music, off the radio, and me, I was into recording voices, and so like, and then I was still visiting friends and playing with the toys, but I started phasing out as a little 11-year-old kid. I mean, we were still into them a little bit, but it was phasing out. And then I got to the point where I sold all of my toys so I could buy my first tape recorder. It was like these little tiny ones, the small portable ones that play cassettes only, no radio and stuff. So I sold all my toys and I bought one of those. So that's all that was in my mind, my tape recorder and my cassettes. And going throughout the rest of the year, cassettes, radio, and music was in our minds. That's all that was in our minds, music. And then maybe and then playing outside was still our thing, talking to friends and neighbors, it was still our thing, that was in our minds. But we started to drift away from toys, anyway. So as a kid, so in the 80s, so what was in my mind is radio cassette recorders, and radio and music and cassettes. And then I still was into my cartoons. I was still into them, the TV, that was in my mind. Like when I come home from school, the first thing I'm thinking in my mind, I would go home, watch TV, the cartoons, and that's it, basically it. And if we weren't doing radio or cartoons, we would just play in the backyard, our little games. Like we would play, me and Arnold and Hector, we sometimes used to play games in the backyard, like. Now, if you notice, I still haven't talked about tablets or internet because we didn't have those. So we had nothing like that. So we had only TV or radio, and then or we would play in the backyard, or we would just play with the friends or talk to friends, and that's all we did. It's all that was in our mind, talking to friends and having fun, having fun with the friends, playing games. Stuff like that. going on to 1982. So like we moved to that's when we moved to that Covina house, 1634 1 Edna Place Street. That's when we moved into there. And then during that time, it was like with the new Atari that we got, that was a new thing in our minds, the Atari. So that was a new one right there, and that was really cool because we got our first Atari in 1982, and Hector wanted one because he knew that he saw that some people had the Atari, so he wanted to go with the trend. So he asked for an Atari for his birthday, but he didn't get it. But later on, my dad bought us all an Atari. $140 for the Atari 2600, and it came with the combat game and 2 joysticks and set of paddles. So after getting the Atari and hooking it up to that TV, now that was a new thing in our minds. So the radio and cassettes and recording off the radio and music and watching a little TV, but now Atari was a new thing, and I think we were probably a little bit more, we were slowly, this is where it started with these electronics, that we started paying more attention to the electronics, like how we are with the Xbox and stuff. But anyway, Atari, and then I was getting into it. I was sort of into it, but not that much. Well, I was still into my radio and cassettes and music and talking to friends. That's basically it right there. I was not really doing toys anymore, and then I wanted a bike. My brothers wanted a bike. They wanted the Schwinn Predator bike. There's a really cool bike, back in the day. My dad bought us all bikes for Christmas, so that's now a new thing because that's kind of like another trend. Bikes. My neighbors had bikes, and we wanted to go with the trend, so we bought bikes ourselves. My dad bought us bikes. So 1982, we were into bikes, and we were into our radio cassette recorders and a little bit of the Atari, but we kind of like more into going outside and playing, we were more into like interacting with friends, and watching TV. That's what was in my mind, watching TV. And then when I would go to school, talking to my classmates in school, and then we would talk about the show that we just watched yesterday, like that type of thing. Or I would watch the TV. We would watch news with my dad, So TV, watching the cartoons, I was still into that. And I would go on my radio and look for songs to record off the radio, and that's all that was in my mind, and play with friends. That's it. That's all it was, nothing else. It was just radio, cassette recorder, the TV show Tom and Jerry, and talking to neighbors and friends. That's it, basically it, but we had a lot of fun, talking in the neighborhood. I would say talking to friends and playing games, that was probably the funnest part of everything, I have to admit, back in the time, interacting with friends and playing games, or doing our little hobby games, or playing games or things like that. That was like the thing that made us happiest, and that's what actually powered us, Yeah, that's what powered us to make us happy, because it was fun, it was fun doing that. Going on to 1983, that's when I got my stereo. A stereo was kind of a trend, but we never really had the money. We never had money to buy a stereo system. And so my birthday came in 1983. I was a teenager, and I wanted a stereo system, a shelf stereo. I got one for my birthday, and I was so freaking happy, man. Shit, I felt so cool, man. I felt so macho, like with the stereo, because now we could play records, because records was like a big trend, I thought that shit was really cool. I felt so cool to own a stereo system, So, from that point of the stereo, music is more into my mind now. That's all that was in my mind now. Cassettes and music and recording off the radio more and more and more. I mean, that became all in my mind, and that's basically all that was in my mind during that time. And for Hector and Arnold, I think Hector and Arnold, what they loved to do during those times is interacting with their friends. I mean, they would watch TV and talk to their friends. And that's it. That's all they used to do. I mean, that's all we used to do. Yeah, that's all. I mean, that's all we had available to do, really, back in the time. Or music, Hector and Arnold, they loved to go out and talk to the neighbors. Noe, if you remember, if you see Noe in the videos, they used to do a lot of interacting with friends, and sometimes we would play games, but we would just talk, interact, just have a little conversation and talk, or we would just play games or whatever. I mean, that's all we used to do. I mean, that's all that was available to do, really. But I mean, they had a lot of fun. I mean, we all had fun doing that. I mean, that was a lot of fun right there. I mean, that was all the fun in the world right there. I mean, and of course, we had our music to entertain us, my new stereo to entertain us, and my friends would come over to our place to record some cassettes, some of that breakdancing music that started coming out, and so that's all that was in my mind, music and recording. For me, that's all that was in my mind. It was just music and recording and watching my cartoons. That's basically it, and maybe interacting with friends. That's it. I mean, that's all. Those are the only three things, basically: music, my cassettes, and just music and interacting, and my TV. That's it. Going on to '84, that's when the breakdancing came on. Same thing, that all that was in my mind was my music and my cassettes recording off the radio. And then that's the year when the Atari, the sales came along, and it had a massive sale. They had a massive sale because when I don't know the story exactly. I know it's something to do that they messed up. They went bankrupt, or I don't know. I know that they messed up on the game E.T. and Pac-Man when they made too many of those copies or something. They lost a lot there, so that they're going bankrupt. I don't know exactly what it is, but I just know that the Atari. I mean, $3 a game back then, and then. That filled up my mind right there. It's all I did during that time, because I started collecting games left and right since they were only $3 each, on the average. So that was like a new thing that came in my mind, and I really enjoyed that moment of time in 1984. I enjoyed my music life. The cassettes and the music, recording off the radio. I enjoyed doing that. And then the Atari too was a thing that I really enjoyed as well. I mean, that was something new. That was super enjoyable. I really enjoyed that time. And that's all that was in my mind at the time. If you still notice, I'm not talking about tablets or internet or iPhones, and because we didn't have them then, we either had the Atari, our music, the cassettes, the TV, or talking to friends. Basically, that's it right there. I mean, those are the four things, basically. I mean, that I had available. My Hector and Arnold were not all that much into the Atari, but they were, but not that as much. So they were more into going out with their friends, going out to like Disneyland, or just going out with their friends, going places. They used to like to go places. That's all they used to do. They used to just like to go places like arcades, that type of thing. That was in Hector's and Arnold's mind, arcades and things like that, arcade. And so I mean, for me, so anyways, arcades. So I mean, that was then, that's all that was in my mind. 1985, it's still the same thing, like I was still into my cassettes and radio and Hector and Arnold, and we were still into like interacting with friends it's talking and playing games. We were still into that stuff, you know. And nothing really changed in 1985. But now going on to, well, on Christmas, I got a computer of 1984. I got that Atari computer. So that was kind of a new thing now. Going into the trend, a new thing into the trend of the computer, you know, Atari. So we got the Atari. I mean the computer, and then that now was another new thing in my mind. The Atari was phasing off a little bit in my mind. The computer was more into my mind. So I was still watching TV, and now the computer was like the big thing, and the radio and cassettes are still a big thing in my mind. That's all that was in my mind. The cartoons, I was still into those, and talking to friends. That's it. I mean, that's all. I mean, really. But now the computer, I was into the computer, programming little games or programming things, you know, on my own. There was no internet, though, of course. We didn't have internet. It was just like mostly games that we used to play, or we used to like to program to tell it to do various things, you know, little various things, like, I mean, like yes and no questions or whatever, math quiz or whatever. Or tell it to do whatever he wanted to do. So, I mean, that was in my mind. In 1985, I was like really into voice recording. And then, I mean, of course, like during those times, all the way up until going on to like 86. Well, 1986, it was still the same, you know, into my music. All that was in my mind, my music, and the Atari a little bit, and the computer was a big thing in my mind. And Hector and Arnold still, you know, they love to interact with their friends and watch their TV. I mean, watch our shows, or me cartoons, or we would watch our shows and stuff. I mean, that's it. I mean, we didn't have, that's when we started hearing about VCRs, and we started to want a VCR, you know. So in our little mind, in our little teenager minds during the 80s decade, that's what it looked like. That's what our teenager minds look like during the decade, you know, like. But so, I mean, if we're talking about 1985 and going on to 86, it's basically the same. But in 1985, at the end of, for Christmas, 85, we got our VCR. So that's now yet a new thing in my mind. VCR. Recording off the TV now. I was like so happy. I thought that shit was so freaking cool to record off the TV. And now I could record the cartoons, and I've been wanting to do that. I've been wishing to do that for a long time. And then now I could do that now. I say to myself, I was so happy, man. I was like, I loved it. I loved the VCR days, you know. I mean, I was so excited to have a VCR there, you know. Shit, I tell you. So now VCR was a new thing in my mind. So now more things are starting to go into my life, you know. Like, I'm starting to get more things into my mind, you know. Like, going on to 86, the VCR was now a new thing in my mind. And then my computer, I was still into my Atari computer. And then I was a little bit into the Atari game system, the 2600. That was still into watching the TV, but I was watching a little less. But I was into my VCR. I was into the VCR recording stuff, you know, TV shows. I was getting all into that stuff. And then Hector and Arnold, they're still into their friends, you know. I mean, that's all they mostly did. Their friends, mostly. I mean, and if they weren't talking to their friends, they would be watching the TV, and that's it. I mean, Hector and Arnold used to do just mostly the TV and friends. That's it, mostly. I mean, it was all about interacting with friends back then, you know. But for me, I mean, what was in my little mind was VCRs, the Atari computer, my Atari 2600, and watching my cartoons, and now recording cartoons, and a little bit of interacting with friends, you know. I mean, I was more into the VCRs and electronics. But I mean, I was more in that. That's all that was in my mind. But I didn't have any internet, so all that was in my mind was playing with my VCR, my music recording off the radio. I mean, that's all that was in my mind back then. And talking to any immediate neighbors, you know, That's it, 87, it was basically the same. But now my neighbor, they got into DJing, and then the music that he was coming home with, man, I tell you, man, I love that music that he was playing. Shit. So he'd play the music, and so that was like a big trend. So now the neighbor, that was in his mind, his DJing and his records and stuff. But in my mind, it was music, cassettes, and a little bit of the VCR, and a little bit, and during '86, that's when we had a big party, in our backyard, or his backyard, where everybody came over, and at that time I wanted all kinds of attention there, I tell you. So it was all about interacting with friends. I mean, everybody was there. I mean, all the school kids were there, and that's what we did, like, man. And that's one of the number one things that my neighbors and Hector and Arnold was into. Friends, interacting with people, or having our little days, and having our little get-togethers, and interacting with people. That was like the number one thing. Going on to '86, and then now going on to '86 and '87, and that's when cars started getting into the story with Hector. Hector first started driving, and then now Hector wanted a car. And then now everybody was wanting cars now. I mean, he's like, everybody's wanting cars now, like this one right here. I mean, my mom's car, like in 1986. I'm gonna close that hood. I just need to. Well, anyway, cars. So this is what cars look like during the times of what was in my mind, Cars. Hector wanted a car. I mean, it's like Hector first started driving. So Hector, as much as being into his friends, interacting with his friends, and Arnold, and now he wanted his own car. He wanted a car. So he needed to save up money to buy a car. So he saved enough money, and he bought this car. He bought a Volkswagen Beetle for his first car. And so that was in his mind, basically, then, the car. His Beetle was in his mind, and interacting with friends. That's it. And maybe now he was more into getting into calling friends now, like phones. While Hector and Arnold, they're like into the phone, too. They're calling their friends on the landline. Hector did a lot of that back then, talking to their friends, and then setting a time where they want to go, whatever. I mean, if they were gonna have a party, they would call and each other and set a meet together day or whatever. Like, they would do everything either by talking directly to the neighbor or going on the phone, on the landline, And so in Hector's mind, it was all about interacting with friends, and now his car, and the car, and to be able to explore the world, the car. I mean, and in my mind was still VCRs and watching the cartoons and playing Atari and the computer especially. And then I started getting to my bike, again. I mean, I was getting into a bike now because I wanted something different, That bike sounded something different. I wanted a bike for my birthday, so I mean, I got money for my birthday, and I bought my bike in 1986 because I wanted something different, because I started getting bored of the stereo system, being into my stereo and music. Started getting bored of it, So anyway, I got into my car. So I mean, what did I say? Oh, the bike. I wanted to do a bike now. I mean, so now '86 and '87. Now that's another new thing. It's like hobbies, like so bikes, VCR, music. I think the number one things in my mind around that time was my music, recording off the radio, and my bike, watching cartoons, VCRs, and it's mostly like electronics in my mind, That's all it was. I did not used to call anybody. I did not interact with anybody as much. But if I would be interacting with my neighbors, I mean, So Hector and Arnold, on the other hand, it was all about interacting with friends and neighbors and hanging out and doing things, partying with each other, just physically, physically partying. They would physically do that. I mean, and of course, that's what that, and then the car came along, and then of course they're drinking. They started getting into the drinking. That was in their mind, It was all about interacting with friends. That's it. All about that. It's all about that for Hector and Arnold and everybody back then, 87, 86, Hector got his first car, and then that's all that was in his mind, the car and interacting with friends, 87 and 88, everything still looked the same, like basically it's still, Hector and Arnold are still into partying and hanging out with their friends and interacting with their neighbors, and then the car, and like driving all over the place with the car, visiting others. It was all about interacting with friends, for Hector and Arnold and my neighbors and everything. But for me, I was into my electronics. I was basically like into my VCR, watching the TV, recording off the TV, and music. I was all about music and recording off the radio back then. And then I got my first job going on to 87, and then that's when I wanted a video camera, and that's all that was in my mind. And I got my job, and now the job was a new thing in my mind, because all that was in my mind around that time was saving up money, man. Shit. Saving up $1,000 freaking dollars so I could buy that fucking camera that I've been wanting for so freaking long, and I'll tell you. Of course, that was in my mind even through the entire 80s decade, starting from 1981. I was like, ever since the first time I saw a video camera, I wanted one. I was 10 years old in 1980, and I wanted a video camera from the first time I saw it, man. Shit, no chance of getting it. So I forget about that back then. So now going on to 88 and 87, when I got my first job, now all that was occupying my mind is getting my video camera, and of course my other electronics, and then even me. I was wishing I had a car myself, but I didn't have the money for that. I was wishing for a car so I can hope to get attention, like that, that kind of thing. But anyway, all that was in my mind was saving up for that video camera, my camcorder, and in my VCR, the Atari. I was not really as much into the Atari anymore. I was more into other things. I was mostly still into my music, And so, like 87, and so finally in 88, I got the camcorder in March of 88. So freaking happy. I was like all happy. And so now that was another new thing in my mind. It was all about making videos. It was all about videotaping. For me back then, that's all that was in my mind, back then. As a teenager in 1988, 18 years old. It's just me. That was me. I was just into my hobbies. I was just into my electronics, like my camcorder and my VCR. I was just into my electronics, I was a little less into the computer, my Atari computer, a little less into the game systems. And then later on that year, I was able to get a scooter. I wanted a car, but I wanted a scooter instead, I decided that I wanted a motor scooter instead. So I got one of those. I got a scooter, and I was like all happy, and I was hoping that I can get attention with that too. I was hoping to get attention with the scooter. I was hungry for attention and everything. I was hungry for it back then, because I guess I come in a different angle of life, so to speak. Hector and Arnold were very interactive with friends and stuff, but for me, I was a little bit on the shy side, a little bit more on the like introverted side, But anyway, I mean, as an introverted, I mean, I was just all into my electronics, my VCR. But during '88, with the new scooter that I got, that was my new hobby. I loved riding that scooter, you know. So, I mean, that scooter was all in my mind. It was my scooter and maybe watching the cartoons still, or recording movies off the TV, and I was still into that. I mean, if you still notice that I haven't said anything about internet or cell phones or tablets, because we had none of those. So instead, what was in my mind, without tablets and iPhones and internet, that's what my mind looked like, you know, in the late 80s. My scooter, I had no choice. I mean, it was my scooter or my VCR, like recording off the TV, collecting TV movies on video, and that's all that was in my mind, you know, in that time. And then I was into my computer a little bit. I mean, a little less. But the main thing I still was into was music, recording off the radio, and making videos. I mean, making videos was a big hobby for me back then, you know. Making videos, making home movies, because I just had this thing about doing that. I mean, and that's all that was in my mind, you know, making home movies and music, recording off the radio, and my scooter. Those are the three basic things. That's all that was in my mind back in that time, because I had no internet, no nothing. So that's all that was in my mind. And apparently, since there was no internet available, I mean, that's what I did without internet, you know, as you could see it. Without internet, that's what I did, basically. I just went into what was available, which was my scooter and my camcorder and my music. Those were my main hobbies back then, you know. But for Hector and Arnold, they're still, I mean, all that was their hobby, and their minds was interacting with friends and partying. That's all that was in their minds, you know. Basically, they were hardly into anything else other than their cars and friends and interacting. That's all. I mean, nothing, no cell phone, nothing. All they did, I mean, or talk on the friends of the phone, on the landline. And that's it. I mean, it was just those basic three things for Hector and Arnold and everybody else. Their cars, interacting with friends physically, or like face to face, or how you call it, physically, or I mean like in person. All that was in our mind was interacting with in person, because that's the only way we had back then, you know. Interacting in person, cars to get to that friend's house and go to the party, to interact in person, and phones to talk to the friends whenever like we wanted convenience to talk to them over the phone, on the landline, you know. So that's all there was in the 80s, during the 80s. And even going on to 1990, which I'm going to stop right there, because I'm talking about how things were, what our minds looked like in the 80s. So in 1990, it was still basically 80s, you know. And then of course we got our first Nintendo system, and so that we were going on with the trend, you know, the video game systems, you know. We were not that much into games during the 80s, but it started in the 90s when Cynthia was 10 years old, when she was getting into the trend, you know, wanting to go with the trend, you know. So she wanted to have what everybody else had, like the Nintendo. I mean, we had that, and so now that was like a new hobby for all of us now. I mean, 1990, and then it went on to the and then you know, if I could just quickly go through 1990s, you know, like I could quickly, like, I mean, in 1990s it was basically the same as the 80s. We still interacted with friends, and I mean, we got our first modern computer in 1995. Well, that was Arnold's computer. He paid $3,000. But even then, you know, we weren't even really on the internet then, you know. We weren't even in it then, but I was still into my music, recording off the radio. I was still into doing that stuff. And then I had my car and everything. I was doing my car, and all that was in my mind during the 90s was the car. With my car, I was really into my car. And I loved music, you know. I was really into my car, and basically all there was available for me to, and of course any electronics that I love to do, but it was phasing off. I was now wanting to, in my mind, what was in my mind in the 90s, I wanted to, I wanted to be meeting up people, you know, because I was kind of getting bored being by myself in the house with my electronics, my camcorder. I was getting kind of bored being by myself, so I wanted to find a girlfriend, you know. I wanted to find people to interact with, you know, have fun, you know. So my car is all that was in my mind, and interacting with friends, you know. But for me, I was pretty weak on that because I was a little excessively introverted back then, you know, a little excessive. So that was kind of hurtful. That hurt me during the 80s and 90s. Like being an introverted during the 80s and 90s, it's pretty painful because you don't have anything to help you, you know, because your only way to get around, the only thing that you could do is, I mean, during the 80s and 90s decade, the only thing you can do to interact is to do it in person. Back in clubs, or when you go with your brother to your friend's house or whatever, that's your only hope to interact. Or maybe just going outside in the neighborhood and talking to your friends in the neighbor or whatever. I mean, that was the only hope that you're gonna find friends or girlfriends, you know, by doing everything in person during the 90s. For me, it was hard for me because I was really excessively shy. So I was really excessively shy, so it was harder for me during the 80s and 90s decade, because the only way I could find friends is to go in person and talk to them, and that was too difficult for me. But I mean, but for the extroverts, on the other hand, it was easy for them, and it was good for the extroverts then, because I mean, it was only that specific group of people that you can interact with, you know. And then, you know, well, anyway, for me, I mean, in my mind, in the 90s mind, was trying to find friends, trying to find meat, or trying to find a soulmate. But it was really difficult because, because the only way I can find them is to do it in person, but I was too shy to do that, you know. So it was harder. It was hard for me during the 90s decade and 80s decade, you know. But anyway, so I mean, that's what. And for Hector and Arnold, they're still into partying, and I mean, it was basically all the same. But even though we got our first computer in 1995. And that's when we started doing internet. But I mean, internet, I mean, did not boom. Was nothing. It was nothing then, you know. I mean, we could not really do much on the internet back then because it was barely new, you know, or kind of anyway. And I mean, it started to boom up, you know, the internet world. It started to boom up in the middle 90s, you know. So, and then going all the way until the late 90s, that's when I got my first cell phone, basically. And so things changed a little bit, but it was still the same, you know. Like, it's still the same as far interacting, you know. We didn't really have internet back. Well, the internet was more stronger going on to the end of 90s, but we still were more dependent on interacting with people in person back then. So basically 80s and 90s are all the same, basically. But it was not until going on into the middle 2000s, basically, like early 2000, or maybe more like the middle 2000s, where the internet was so well boomed up that we were now able to go onto the internet to meet people now instead, like the MySpace and all that stuff. Oh, I mean, I tell you, I remember those days. I mean, well, anyway, that's how our minds looked like as a teenager during the 80s and 90s decade. So, I mean, that's what I have to tell you right there. And that's what my mind looked like during the 90s decade and 80s decade. But, I mean, the 80s and the 90s are basically the same. I mean, as far as the ability to interact or the things that we had available to do. We had no internet, so we did everything in person, or we did everything manually. Like, I mean, we did everything in person, like we didn't have YouTube, so our form of entertainment was doing everything in person, Yeah, or so there you have it. So that's how our minds look like during the 80s and 90s decade. So I hope you liked this video because it was a good one, I mean, it was fun talking about this right now. So, I mean, this is the way it looked. So, if I could have my say on if I can have my say now, if I'm gonna compare it with today, my kids, if I could compare it with today, I mean, it's like today, if I was a teenager, like back in my time with my video camera and stuff, and wishing and having a hard time interacting with people because of being too shy. Now, if I could bring myself back then to today, it would be a great advantage to me because, I mean, I would be able to talk to people online now. I mean, I would be able to, like the YouTube thing, I would be able to post on Facebook or something, and then I would have a number of possible people coming to me who seems interested in my status and stuff. So it would be easy. I would feel that it would be easier for me, like if I could bring myself from the 80s into today to help with the interaction, and it would have been easier. I would say it would be easier. I mean, I get to interact, but I mean, that's how I would think of it. But then on the other hand, but the thing I compare with that with my kids, the things that my kids are doing in today's times, I mean, they're all they're really into is the computer, their phone, and their tablets, playing Roblox or playing well, just watching YouTube and watching all those YouTubers and watching watching everything on YouTube, watching their vlogs and stuff. My kids do that. That's all they really do. I try to get my kids to go outside, but I mean, all that's in their mind basically is just like YouTube and playing games on the tablets, Roblox, or Minecraft. I mean, my kids today. My little one, she does go out and play with her friend. Believe it or not. I mean, she does have a little neighbor that once in a while she does play with them, and she does what we used to do as kids. Yes, believe it or not, she's actually doing that today, right now. I mean, she's doing that right now only because the neighbors. Maybe they're pretty strict. I think. They might be strict, like we should be, but while they're playing, my kid is into the playing. Is with my playing games, but if she's not playing with her neighbor, she's home just watching YouTube. That's all. That's all they ever do here, and that's today. And then like you figure, today's times, like everywhere we go, all of the youngsters, all the teenagers today, well, some of them are still gonna interact or friends, like some people are still into their friends and stuff, but when they're home, they're gonna go to their Facebook, or they're gonna be on their phones day and night when they go home, and they're a little bit less interactive with their friends, and they're more into their phones and Facebook and playing online games and stuff. They're more into that stuff. I think they are indeed more into the internet world today than they are in the open world. That's what I would have to say. How I compare today with then. Well, back then in the 80s and 90s decade, the only choice we had was actually interacting in person, basically, and playing with the electronics. Basically it. That was it right there. That's what we had. But now today, what we have today is like the phones. Everybody's all into the internet, the Facebook, and even me. I'm guilty of that myself. I'm really into the YouTube myself. Even me. Because sometimes with like so many people doing that, there's nobody out there to play with. So there's nobody out there to interact with because nobody likes to be outside anymore these days. But well, for me, I like to force myself to go out and ride that bike or something. But it's less people doing things like that these days. So it's like more people are staying home and more sedentary. More people are that like sedentary and on their computers and internet and phones and stuff like that, and everything. It's like, but for me, it's like, I was all into my electronics during the 80s. All that was in my mind was electronics. It was like my electronics hobbies and interacting with people in person. And for Hector and Arnold, all that was basically in their minds for 80s and 90s was interacting with people in person, and basically that's it, really. We didn't have anything else. That's it. So this should wrap this video up. So I hope you liked this video as much as I liked it. So as much as I liked talking about this. So I hope you're gonna enjoy the rest of your whole day, and I'm gonna try posting up more videos. You guys can make requests on what type of videos you want, and I'll do it. If it's a specific date or some, but keep in mind that I might accidentally upload a duplicate video or actually a partial duplicate, but I'm gonna try I'm gonna try looking for more interesting videos to upload. Okay, alrighty. I'll see you all. I hope I didn't bore you now. It's a 55-minute long video. Okay.